Hello, everyone. Charles Watts here. Welcome back to Inside Arsenal. Thank you for joining me as always, and thank you for joining me on a very special day, as this is the launch of a brand new series that I'm going to be doing here on Inside Arsenal called My Arsenal Story. We're going to be talking to people who have been connected to the club, either former players, employees, coaches, fans, even, and just get their story of their relationship with the club, how it started, what happened when they were there, how it feels now they've left potentially. And I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into this and bringing it to you on for Inside Arsenal Patreon members, but also to my Inside Arsenal YouTube community as well, and podcast. And I've got a very special first guest to kick this all off today, a man who's had a huge part to play in the sort of modern Arsenal, had a time at the club sort of in official capacity spanning 13 odd years, but was connected with the club before that as well. So I'm delighted to welcome on to the show Richard Law, who was Arsene Wenger's right-hand man, I suppose you could call yourself, Richard. You're the transfer fixer, contract negotiator, but plenty more than that as well. Thank you for joining me, first of all. Really good to see you.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks for the opportunity to tell my Arsenal story.
No problem. Really looking forward to getting stuck into this. Now, for people who may not have known you, you obviously were at Arsenal in an official capacity, I think from 2005 to 2018, wasn't it? But you did work with the club before coming on board in 2005 as well. So why don't you just quickly, before we get stuck into it, just sort of give us a brief roundup, if that is even possible, given how long you're at the club, just a brief roundup of your time, or what you were doing when you were at Arsenal.
Yes. So I first met Arsene Wenger and David Dean, helping out with the transfer of a player that Arsenal fans know and love, Edu Gaspar. I was working in Brazil as part of a private equity group that had made an investment into two Brazilian clubs, one called Corinthians and the other one called Cruzeiro. And Corinthians had transferred Edu. And that transfer ran into a little bit of trouble. And so the club asked me to, the Corinthians asked me to step in and kind of give them a hand. But I believe that, and I developed a relationship with Arsene and with David from that point on. But I would say that my real Arsenal work started with the transfer of Gilberto Silva. Arsene was in Japan for the 2002 World Cup. And I remember standing in my front yard in Brazil, getting a call from David, who said, Arsene's found a player. And of course, at the time, I didn't realize how rare a statement that was. I subsequently learned that it was pretty rare for him to say he's found a player. And the happy news is that we worked out a transfer between Atlético Mineiro and Arsenal, and Gilberto went on to have a wonderful Arsenal career. My time in Brazil wound down, and by 2005, frankly, I was looking for a job, and David called me up and said, "Listen, could you help us out in the Americas?" So my remit there was to put together a scouting organization that would report to Steve Rowley, who was our chief scout, to find talent throughout the Americas. And, one of the first players we found was Carlos Vela, who went on to have a wonderful career in the game. Probably not as long at Arsenal as I would have wished, but another player that we were able to find as part of that effort was Danielson, who I think played over 150 matches for the Arsenal. Then in 2009, after my work, for 4 or 5 years in South America and in the U.S., the club asked me if I would be interested in applying for the job that we roughly called the head of player operations, which was the player contracts, the movement of players in and out of the club. I interviewed, and happily the idea was that they thought I was good at what I was doing, and that was my job, until I retired in February of 2018. in and around 2014, when Liam Brady stepped down, we incorporated all of the academy players into that role. So we had kind of a unified approach to all of our contracts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to get really stuck into all of this. I'm looking forward to having a chat about that. I mean, it's been 7 years though now since you sort of left the club. I think it was 2018, wasn't it? After the January transfer window, 2018. I mean, what's life like now? Because I can imagine it was very, very, I don't know if stressful is the right word, but it would have been all encompassing during that time at Arsenal. So the sort of 7 years you've had since then, I imagine this is a nice relaxing period, Richard, isn't it?
Well, if you can call grandchildren relaxing. But no, my time at Arsenal was certainly the best years of a great career. I worked in Spain, I worked in South America, I worked in Mexico as part of my career. But my Arsenal years, I think, capped off a wonderful career in sports. Since then, I jokingly tell my wife that people seem to think I know something about the game. And so it's been nice to have phone calls for either people looking for advice or from time to time doing a consultancy for a club and kind of helping them work their way through whatever problems they're facing.
And you've taken to writing, haven't you? You're telling me a book is on the way, sort of based, or it's fictional, but it's based around sort of all the experiences you've had in at Arsenal and at other clubs, I presume, as well, called Clapham Common, that could be hitting the shelves soon. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think the standing joke among football executives is that we're all going to write a book. And I guess I took that to heart, and so I did write a book. I think the objective of the book was really to give fans a sense of what happens behind the scenes. And so that everything that they see on the pitch or everything that they read or it gets reported, sometimes isn't the whole story. And of course, I had 25 years worth of material to pull from. So, my working title was Clapham Common, a fictional memoir. But yes, if I'm lucky enough to have it published, and I'm hoping to have that soon, yes, the title of the book would be Clapham Common. And it's the story of, in many ways, a Brentford, Matthew Bennett story of a football fan who wants to own a football club. And so this chairman called William Ingman buys the rights to a name called the Clapham Rovers, which was in English football history a real club. And he takes it through the successive divisions all the way to the top. And in the midst of that, a manager is hired, key players are hired, a striker who is just an out-and-out narcissist. I know that'll be a shock to fans to think of a striker as a narcissist. A wonderfully gifted midfielder, but troubled in some ways, and then a world-class defender who has striking doubts of confidence, and each one of these characters is a composite of players I've known through the years.
Uh-huh. So you've used sort of actual, although it's fictional, a lot of this is sort of based loosely, I suppose, around stories and things you've seen, you've heard, it's based on actual experiences of what you've gone through during your time in football.
Yeah, my friends keep saying that readers might be interested to try to figure out who I'm talking about or who I'm writing about in the book. And I would encourage readers probably not to focus too much on that, but more focus on kind of the story behind every player.
Yeah. So was that a lot of fun to do? I mean, as someone who's fairly recently published a book and put an awful lot of work into doing that, I know how hard it how hard it is. So was it a real sort of love affair for you? How did you find it?
Um, yes, it was. What I discovered is that I like to write. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Um, I I I was surprised at how easily some of the stories came to me. Um, but of course, as I mentioned, I had lots of material. But most of all, I wanted to write something that has some quality to it, and that was the hard part.
Yeah.
Is it's not just writing for the sake of writing, but having a bit of quality to it.
Excellent. Well, looking forward to that, Richard. Looking forward to it being published and getting my hands on a copy. Excuse me. Right. So let's start then on your Arsenal story. So you sort of touched on it briefly there. Obviously, officially, it started in 2005, really, with
Mhm.
the move into the sort of Americas project that they had. But as you said, it started before that, really, the connection with Arsenal, with David, all sort of, it began with Edu, didn't it? So that was around, what, 2000, wasn't it? The Edu transfer.
Yes, that would have been 2000, correct.
Yeah. So how did that all come about then? You said it was actually, oh no, sorry, I was thinking about Gilberto then. So how did the Edu one come around? Did you already have a
Well,
relationship with David or Arsene, or is that how it all started?
no, had never met him, and the team was in the Corinthians team was playing a friendly match against PSG in Paris, and the club president of Corinthians was there, the vice president of finance was there, and because my remit was really to look after the interest of the private equity fund. I was certainly aware that Corinthians had transferred one of their players called Edu to Arsenal, but that wasn't on my plate, so to speak. And then I get a phone call about 11 o'clock at night from the president of Corinthians in Paris, and I was certainly probably more asleep than awake. Said that there's a problem and we need to go speak to the people at Arsenal. And my reply to the president of Corinthians was, why am I getting involved? Because it's a Corinthians player. He said, well, you speak English, you speak Portuguese, we need a translator. So about 11 o'clock at night, we went over and met the people from Arsenal, and which turned out to be David Dein and Arsene Wenger. And, happily, we got the issue sorted out, and Edu became a wonderful Arsenal player.
Certainly did. And, obviously only just really left the club. So that was all the start of it. And then the Gilberto story, that was when Arsenal was over at the 2002 World Cup, wasn't it? And obviously Brazil won that tournament. Gilberto played a starring role in it. And Arsene spotted him there. And it was at a time when he was really looking to sort of build on the second double that he'd just won. He wanted a partner for Patrick Vieira, and he saw Gilberto, and it was a case of, I want him, right? How do we get that deal done? And that's when you came into the picture again.
Right. So that really happened with me acting as an advisor for the club. I wasn't an agent. The club needed somebody with experience and somebody who could navigate Brazilian football. Because of my work in Brazilian football, I knew all the presidents of all the clubs. And I certainly knew the president of Atlético Mineiro, who was Alexandre Khalil. And so I called him up and I said, listen, I think there's somebody interested in your player. And he first of all, Alexandre is a wonderful person and a great negotiator. But he quickly went into, everybody in the world is calling me, about this player, which I knew was not likely to be true. But that's where it got started. I met Alexandre and the player's agent in London. We all flew over and we met. And probably the key moment in the negotiation was when David Dein had put an offer on the table. It was a good offer. It was firm. I had reasonable, because of my conversations with the agent, I had reasonable assurances that the player was onside. And then Juventus called and tried to hijack the deal. And I think the critical moment, which would be of interest to the fans, was when when David Dean points out to Alexander Khalil that if he left London and flew to meet with Juventus, he wasn't sure that Juventus was good for the money. He absolutely knew that he could get a deal done in London. And I think it took Mr. Khalil probably 5 seconds to realize that to walk away from the Arsenal deal in the hopes that Juventus would be good to a verbal offer was probably too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so Arsenal was able to conclude the deal, and that was the beginning of Gilberto's Arsenal story.
What a story! What a story that was. So, in those sort of early years when you were working behind the scenes on those sort of transfers, I suppose this is where the sort of relationship with Arsene and David, it really sort of grew from there. There was obviously a strong trust there from them to you, after what you did with Edu and Gilberto, and that sort of trust built up and built up and built up. So, I mean, those were very, very important early years, I presume, for you and your Arsenal story.
Yeah, those were critical years in the sense of three people getting to know each other, learning, if you could trust each other, because, football is full of people who talk a lot. And it's you build trust by actually doing things. Mm-hmm. And you build trust by the way you talk and by the way you handle certain situations. And so on a mutual basis, what I found in Arsene Wenger and David Dean were two individuals who were always good to their word. If they said something, you had a high degree of certainty that they meant it and they would follow through. Mm-hmm. I hope they saw that characteristic in myself, and so yes, we were able to build a great rapport between us.
Mm-hmm. And then it was 2005, wasn't it, when David approached you about the sort of the Americas project of potentially coming on board? Because what had happened before then? I mean, I suppose going back before Arsenal, your actual involvement in football, because you were working in MLS, weren't you? I think you'd worked in Mexico as well. Right. But then in 2005, were you sort of between jobs, or were you in a job at that point when Arsenal came knocking and said, "Okay, do you want to sort of turn this official?"
Yeah. So when I was working in Mexico, I was the general manager of a subsidiary for an American sporting goods company called Spalding, and I wanted Spalding to get involved in the football world, and so we pitched and eventually were accepted as the official ball of the Mexican League, and of course that process introduced me to a lot of football people in Mexico, starting with the national team coach Bora Milutinovic. From there, I went to Major League Soccer as the vice president of consumer products, which was basically their licensing initiative. But of course, the league was only 2 years old, and all of these brands, the names of these teams, kind of meant nothing in the commercial world. So, so that was a bit of an uphill slog. But then I was approached by this private equity group to take over their investment into 2 Brazilian clubs, but also look at other investment opportunities. It was, what's very common today, a multi-club platform. And it had the added twist that the private equity group actually invested in players. So a Brazilian national team player called Vampeta, for example, the private equity group invested a certain amount of money to buy the economic rights. And so when that player was sold to Inter Milan, of course, the percentage of economic rights reverted back to the private equity group. Mm-hmm. But this was at a certain point in time when this concept of your playing rights and your economic rights were 2 separate things. but it became very much part of football going forward at that point. When my job in Brazil wound down in 2002, I started my own company in Brazil. And but by 2004, I realized that I could continue to do that, but it really wasn't what I was interested in. And so by 2005, I wrote David and said, I think I'm going to step away from the football world, and I have a job offer to go back to the corporate world in sports. And then he said, don't do that. So, but what David was working on was something that he found while he was negotiating in Spain, which was the Spanish government had created a fast track to citizenship for citizens of former colonies or former parts of the Spanish Empire. From Mexico. Interestingly enough, they included Brazil. A little cheeky on the part of the Spanish, but Brazilians were also given that type of fast track. So we started this program of bringing players through Spain and seeing if we could qualify them through a residency and ultimately a citizenship program. And I would say we had some moderate success. I couldn't consider it a smashing success.
Yeah, I remember that time because there was a lot of players going over there, wasn't there?
Yeah, but the
2-3 years there trying to get the sort of work permit, wasn't it?
Correct. So, Charles, I think the big challenge, and the way I would express it is, if Emirates cost the club give or take 600 million. If the club had chosen to stay in Highbury with a maximum capacity of 38,000, you could raise ticket prices successively, but that also has its limit. And then you gave the football department 600 million pounds to compete against the new reality of the Abramovich Chelsea or the Ferguson, Man United. I would dare say that Arsenal would have been more competitive, but money always doesn't tell the story clearly, because at that point in time, Arsenal were very competitive, coming out of the invincible season. Mm. But the right decision was made. Emirates has now become an iconic stadium, and it's given the club a sustainable revenue stream for years to come. Mm-hmm. But things were tight, and then the ability to find and recruit players that were a fraction of the cost of European players or even English players was, of course, the thrust of the effort.
Yeah. So you spent 4 years doing that, didn't you? I think 2005 to 2009.
Yes.
And then it was sort of all change again. And I think Ivan Gazidis had come in, hadn't he, as CEO. And you and I then had sort of crossed paths. In fact, I think you had offices next to each other from your time at MLS, didn't you? So you knew each other very well at that point.
Yeah, I knew Ivan, and I knew he was going to be a very effective CEO. I think Ivan made the smartest CEO decision I've seen in a long time, which is when he arrived, he decided to act as a CEO and not get sucked into the football department. Well, one of the mistakes I see frequently on the part of CEOs of football clubs is they get enamored of the football side of the business. And Ivan had the intelligence to understand that, first of all, Arsene Wenger was running the football department pretty well. Okay, didn't need any help there. But with the departure of David Dean, there was that gap missing related to the whole interaction with agents. which is very time consuming and very delicate. And Ivan made the right decision to not get pulled into that world, but to find somebody to fill the role that David filled so wonderfully for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
And the club advertised for that role. I was one of 3 candidates, and thankfully I was able to get the job.
Mm-hmm. And you weren't living in London at this time, were you? This is when you sort of made the move permanently now
Correct.
to London in 2009. So what was, you said at the beginning, the sort of job title that what you called yourself when you made this move into this role? How did you describe it?
Well, we always struggled with this. We basically called it head of player operations. That was an intentionally vague title.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never put that title on a business card because I didn't want. I particularly didn't want club executives and club agents, to start fixating on a title.
Uh-huh.
I thought that the only thing that was really important to a club executive or a club agent that I was negotiating with was my credibility and my association with Ivan and Arsene. Mm-hmm. That was the really important title.
I mean, 2009, it was a really tough time to walk in to that sort of role at Arsenal. You'd already talked about the sort of move from Highbury to the Emirates, the financial implications of that, which were, anyone who was around at that time can remember it very, very well. How, frustrating it was for Arsenal fans at that time, because like you said, 5 years earlier, the Invincible season was still fresh in everyone's memories, but now it felt like the club was really sort of falling behind financially, with the powerhouse of, Abramovich come in and completely changed the football landscape in the Premier League. The machine under Ferguson at Manchester United was just marching on, and Arsenal had kind of been sold the ideology that the move to the Emirates was going to allow them to continue to compete at the top level. But in fact, if anything, the club started to fall behind. And so it was a really tough time to walk into, with a lot of frustration within the fan base. Did you feel that straight away? How was the sort of sense behind the scenes of the club at that point? Because it was a difficult time.
Well, we didn't feel it straight away. We certainly felt this financial pressure straight away, because remember, the global financial crisis of 2008, globally impacted the real estate market. So if you were trying to buy a flat or a house anywhere in the world, but certainly in the US or in England, it was a tough time, a very tough time. And part of the financial equation for the financing of Emirates was, of course, Highbury conversion into flats. So the flats weren't selling, so the revenue wasn't coming in. And yes, it was financially a very tight time. But remember, that's coupled with a philosophy that Arsene developed at the club of not spending money just to spend money. Mm-hmm. Some of the best players in Arsenal history cost a fraction of what we're talking about these days. Mm-hmm. So Charles, you can answer this question better than I could, but do you know what Thierry's transfer from Juventus cost?
About 10 million. Offhand? About 10 million, I think.
Yeah. And what would Thierry Henry cost today?
Priceless, Richard. Priceless.
Yeah. It would be a fair amount.
Yeah, certainly well above 100 million pounds.
No, easily. Cesc Fabregas. That was just an opportunistic signing, and didn't help our relationship with Barcelona. Mm-hmm. But it gave a young man a path upward in football that arguably, if he had stayed at Barcelona, I'm not sure he would have had. So yes, 2009, 2010, 2011 were tough years. Mm-hmm.
I think I remember talking to you before, and you said that at that sort of time, the club had to sort of look at every single pound that they were spending and kind of view it as their money. Manchester United, Chelsea could afford to make mistakes in the market at that point, but yourselves, because of what was going on and how sort of tight the financials were, that any sort of mistake could have proved really, really costly. Is that what it was like?
Yes, I mean we always had the sense. I don't know if my memory is accurate, but if it is, my memory is that Manchester United were absorbing interest expense, just expense on the debt, in excess of £70 million a year. Well, we, our transfer budget wasn't £70 million a year. Mm-hmm. Chelsea's Abramovich was signing and exiting players almost at will. Certainly, they were signing and exiting managers almost at will. But we had an operating philosophy. That was the number one point, is that even if we had the money, I'm not sure that Arsene would have spent just to spend. He was, in fact, I know he would not have spent just to spend. He was always very careful. He treated, I remember some of the biggest arguments we had was, him fighting for every last pound. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a case in point, which I don't think he'll mind telling me the story. We were signing Laurent Koscielny from Lorient. Mm-hmm. And Arsenal did the club-to-club part because the owner of Lorient was French, Arsene's French, and I had already done the player deal, so we had the player on side, and the club-to-club deal was just taking forever, and so I finally went into Arsene. I said, Arsene, what's the problem? I mean, he said, no, we've settled on the transfer fee. I said, okay, so what's the problem? And he said, the owner and president of Lorient is trying to hold me up. And I said, okay, so what's the holdup? He said, it's £1 million. And I said, okay, so what's the £1 million about? And he said, he wants £1 million in the event that the player becomes a French national team player. And I said, that certainly sounds reasonable. And Arsene said, yes, I don't have any trouble with that. So I'm thinking, so what's the problem? Well, Laurent, because of his grandparents, also had the right to have Polish citizenship. So theoretically, he could have also played for Poland. So the owner of Lorient, doing his job, said, if he becomes a national team player for Poland as well as France, I want £1 million. That sticking point took 3 weeks.
Right.
But I think it shows you how tenacious Arsene was in caring for the club and caring for the club's money.
Yeah, I remember during that period there was lots of players who almost signed, or there was interest in. I remember that Eden Hazard, sort of that went on for a fair while before obviously ended up going to Chelsea. I think Thibaut Courtois was another one that you were kind of mulling over and weren't able to get over the line. So you sort of look back at that time now and some of the players you missed out on. Is there a sort of sliding doors thing there where you can kind of envision what the future would have been had some of those deals got over the line that you couldn't quite be able to complete?
It's a long list. Sure. We Arsene and I flew to in the summer of 2016, or maybe it was 2017. Arsene and I flew down to Monaco to visit with Mbappe and his family. So would we have liked to have signed Mbappe? Yeah, just a bit. Yes, you look back. Some deals, some deals fell apart, Charles, because the structure that the agents were insisting on in terms of commissions, we didn't think would pass muster with the Premier League or the FA. And in one case, we were wrong. A commission that was well in excess of 20% of the player's salary was approved, which, frankly surprised us.
Mm-hmm.
So some deals fell apart simply because they became too rich. Some deals fell apart because what was being asked of us in terms of good governance. Arsenal, to Arsenal's credit and its history and its tradition, attempted at every cost to avoid damaging its reputation.
Mm-hmm. I suppose the transfer that is seen as the one that sort of ended that sort of period of financial difficulty was 2013, was Mesut Ozil. A transfer I think that's still probably now. I remember it so vividly that it all played out on Sky Sport News on the day. And I've spoken to you about this before, and I'm really looking forward to you sharing it again. Just exactly what went into getting this deal done in the sort of 48 hours into it, or maybe just more than 48 hours leading up to it. But if you're watching on YouTube, everyone, you can see the picture. You'll all remember it, I'm sure. The moment Sky Sports News announced it outside the Emirates, everyone was out there, and there was just so much excitement. After years of not being able to kind of spend the money and the frustrations that have been growing during that time, suddenly this, young German superstar who'd all seen at the World Cup a few years ago destroy England and others in 2010, had been to Madrid, and Ronaldo loved him, and suddenly Arsenal had signed him for £42.5 million, and it was just such an exciting time as an Arsenal fan to see this deal go through. And now, it's a brilliant story. You told it to me before, how this all played out, because obviously it was. You describe. I'll throw this open to you now in a second, but I remember you describing it to me, saying it is the Mesut Ozil story, but it's also the Gareth Bale story, and how those two were so intertwined in how Mesut ended up at Highbury, at the Emirates in 2013.
Yes. So Arsenal fans, in my opinion, owe Mesut Ozil signing to Gareth Bale. It's that simple. Real Madrid had committed to a transfer fee of over 100 million to signing Gareth. Daniel Levy had done a masterful job of negotiating that deal along with Jonathan Barton. So all of a sudden, Real Madrid had a Galactico signing. Arguably, Gareth was one of the best players in Europe at the time, which was part of their philosophy. This is what they wanted to do. They wanted to sign big, and it was a big signing. Now, I'm at the time and now I'm certainly not privy to the finances of Real Madrid, but we had a very distinct feeling that Real Madrid needed to sell players to help finance that move. So I get a phone call from Jorge Mendes, and the phone call was strange in the sense that Jorge was trying to convince me that Real Madrid were willing to sell Karim Benzema and Angel Di Maria in a package. Now, none of us in London believe that. So what it came down to was a classic bait and switch. Certainly the conversation was interesting enough, and I had met with Jose Angel Sanchez before, the GM at Real Madrid. So I flew down to Madrid, and we met at the Eurostar, and I said, Jose Angel, I understand that you would do a package deal for the two players. And he said, yeah, well, we're thinking about it, but as always, it takes the players to agree. And I said, yeah, that makes sense. And So the team, if memory has it, we were playing a Champions League game in Istanbul, and of course Arsene was with the team. So I reported all this back to Arsene and Ivan, and as even though you don't believe these stories, you still have to follow them through. So I said, sure, let's negotiate. So we actually reached a number for the transfer of the two players. And I think that number would have gone a long, long way to solving Real Madrid's Gareth Bale transfer. But we were still highly skeptical. I mean, Benzema and Di Maria were massive players. And so the next morning, I get a phone call from Jose Angel saying it won't work. And Benzema and Di Maria can't leave. Ancelotti's not going to let them go. And I said, okay. He said, but would you be interested in Mesut Ozil? Well, I mean, Mesut was the engine of that team. And in fact, we heard later that Ronaldo was incensed, because nobody provided better service to Ronaldo's foot than Mesut Ozil. Mm-hmm. And so that deal, all of a sudden, first of all, it wasn't going to cost what the other two were, and we were still very skeptical. First of all, we hadn't spoken at all to the player. His father was acting as his agent, and it just until you speak to the player, you really don't know if the deal can be done. And we hadn't spoken to the player. But I believe that they were serious enough and that they needed the money enough that the deal could happen. And to Ivan's credit, he actually overnighted from Istanbul to Barcelona to Madrid to get there by the time we met with Jose Angel, and then the fun started. So that was like the preamble to everything else that happened. The fun was kind of ending on the day before the end of the transfer window, when we get a phone call from Real Madrid, who said that Daniel Levy has found out that we may be transferring a player to Arsenal, and he said the deal is off for Bale. If Real Madrid transfers a player to Arsenal Football Club, the deal's off. What should he do?
Obviously this is all intertwined because Arsenal were playing Tottenham that day on the Sunday. I think the window shut on the Monday, but that Sunday was the North London derby.
Olivier Giroud scored the winning goal. Yeah. So, at that point, Ivan had an excellent relationship with Jose Angel, and he said, "Listen, just call their bluff. And Bale is already there. He's not coming back." So I spent the better part of that day man marking Mesut's father, because at that point the rumor and the word was beginning to spread around that something was happening, and the team and my colleagues in London, Sven Geismar at head of legal, and Stuart Wisely, who was the head of finance, and David Miles, the club secretary, were brilliant, because I was in Munich man marking, and they were finishing up the player's contract in London with the agent.
Didn't you? You flew back
and then
to be at the North London derby, didn't you? Just so that Tottenham didn't get the sense that something was going on. Because
I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up. Yeah, it was very tense, and Ivan was finishing up the club-to-club deal in Madrid, and knew that he couldn't get back to London. But one of us needed to be in the director's box, so that Tottenham didn't get more anxious than they were. And so I literally flew back that morning, was able to change into a suit and get to the director's box. Got there a few minutes late, and And yes, the Tottenham people were surprised.
Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
I mean, you've got Madrid, London, Munich,
Munich.
all in the space of like 48 hours to try and get this done. Because Mesut was at the German national team, wasn't he, at this point
So
as
he
well?
was flying out to the German national team. You're right. And so we got permission for him to do his to do his physical in Munich. But another twist to the story, because all of these stories have twists. Podolski had injured his hamstring and had asked to rehab in Munich, and which was fine. And wouldn't you know it, he was rehabbing in the same clinic that Mesut was going to have his physical. So we walk in the door, and Mesut's there, and we look to the left into a treatment room, and there's Lucas, waving high. And we're looking. Gary O'Driscoll, the team doctor, and I are looking at each other and saying, "Well, there's no chance this will be a secret now."
Well, fortunately, it didn't have to stay a secret too much longer. I mean, that deadline, it went up. I think the announcement came about an hour before deadline, didn't it? On that.
Yes, it did. Yeah,
that day.
Yeah. It was very tight, very tight.
Just sort of talking about that transfer there, I'd love to get. I mean, did you enjoy that sort of thing? Because I mean, it sounds like it was. There's so much goes into it. It's so tense. There's so much running around. There's so many things that can go wrong. Did it give you a real sort of buzz being involved in those sort of deals? I mean, surely you have to love that adrenaline of trying to get something over the line to do that line of work at all. I mean, it must be keep you up at night, but there must be real sort of adrenaline in trying to get these big deals done.
Well, what I learned about myself is I love negotiating. Mm-hmm. Because negotiating is all about people, and I like people. But I learned three things in negotiating, which I think are absolutely fundamental to any successful negotiation. The first part is you can't make the negotiation emotional or personal. Okay, that's kind of rule number one. It's a business deal. The second part of a negotiation is you can't negotiate unless you can walk away. So if I were ever teaching a class on negotiation, I would say, number one, just remember, this isn't personal. Don't make it emotional. The second principle is you can't negotiate if you can't walk away. So no matter how good the deal is, or no matter how much you want to do the deal, you have to be able to get up out of the chair, shake their hands, and walk away. And then the third principle I tried to adhere to as much as I could is that keep the negotiation private, keep it discreet. Don't negotiate in public, because that puts all kinds of pressure on all the parties. Now, of those 3 points, you can control the first two. You can control your emotions. You can also make a business decision on, how much you're willing to spend, and then walk away if the price gets too high. Unfortunately, because you're dealing with other parties, you can't control the public part of it, because an agent may decide to leak the story in order to put pressure on the club. The other club may want to leak the story in order to satisfy their fans. So you can't control that part. Mm. But to me, those are the 3 kind of guiding principles. And once I kind of had that clear in my mind, yes, I enjoyed it. I mean, a case in point was the transfer of Lacazette from Lyon. They had a number in their minds. We had a number in our mind. And I remember going down there, and it was clear that, we weren't close. So I stood up and walked out. I think that shocked them, because as long as you're at the table, people think you're negotiating. So the only way to break that dynamic is, frankly, to stand up and walk away. Mm-hmm. but yes, to your answer to your question, Charles, I find that negotiation challenges every part, of your brain, and sometimes your body.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're right in slap bang in the middle of the transfer window now, and I try and be as patient as I can with these things, and I see on social media especially, and when I talk to fans, there's patience always kind of wears thin fairly early on in the transfer window if clubs that they want to go out and do business aren't seen as doing business. And you sort of look at Arsenal now, and obviously the big talking point is a striker. Is it going to be Sesko? Is it going to be Victor Gyökeres? And a lot of fans are sort of looking at it and saying, just go and pay the money, get it done. And
Right.
obviously that's a very simplistic kind of view of it. Can you give us an insight into kind of just how tough it is to get deals over the line? Because obviously it's not as easy of just pay the money. There's so many other things that sort of go into it. So can you kind of give us an insight into why, obviously you're not involved in these deals, but maybe these sort of deals that we're looking at potentially happening this summer seem to be going on a lot longer than a lot of people expected them to?
Right. So in any transfer, you've got three parties. So you have the player and the agent, and what they want to do is make as much money as possible. Okay. You also have the club that holds the player's rights. All right, and they want to make as much money as possible. And then you have the buying club, and they want to pay as little as possible. So sometimes it is literally about seeing which one of those parties gives way first.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a game of bluff? I wouldn't call it bluffing. It's more a game of calculation. Because sometimes you're sitting there thinking, I put a good offer on the table. I'm reasonably sure that the club needs the money. Okay. And then you wake up the next morning, you find out they've sold another player and they suddenly don't need the money anymore. And then, then your little bit of leverage has just walked out the door.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in situations where the club didn't want the player to leave, and the player absolutely wanted to come to Arsenal. And that's where, then you begin to rely a little bit on the player putting pressure on the club to force his way out.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I'd like to say it's as simple as a club saying, we'll pay whatever it takes to bring the player in. And you still have a problem, because the minute either one of those two parties gets the sense that there's a blank check, you can imagine where the price goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the player salary and also in terms of the transfer fee. The other dynamic you have to be careful of is the dressing room, because if you overpay a player's salary, okay, and that player walks into the dressing room and doesn't hold up his or her end of the bargain in terms of performance, and players inevitably know what everybody else makes. Mm-hmm. And yes, you can destroy a dressing room by overpaying a player.
Before Mesut signed, obviously that was the same summer of the Luis Suarez bid, which is gone down in football folklore, I think. the Suarez bid. I got to talk to you about that. You talk there about sort of negotiations staying private, and sometimes people sort of leak stuff or put something out. I mean, this was, I've got the tweet here, the famous tweet from John W. Henry. What do you think they're smoking over there at the Emirates when the 40 million plus £1 sort of, wasn't really a bid, was it? Which I'm sure you're going to explain now. You sort of don't view that as a bid. That was supposedly an opening of a negotiation rather than an actual offer. But it's kind of gone down in history as a bid, and one that people, lots of people have sort of poked fun at and laughed at. I mean, do you have regrets about how this all played out? Do you sort of look back on it now and think, the club still played it right, the way they approached sort of trying to trigger this clause? And I mean, you'll explain, I'm sure, what the clause was really about in the first place.
Right. So the clause, we had been approached by the player's agent to indicate that he was unhappy at Liverpool and wanted out. And they had a clause. And so ultimately we asked to see the clause, and we saw it. And when we saw it, we realized the clause wasn't a transfer clause in the traditional sense of the word, which was pay this amount of money and the club will have to let the player go.
Yeah, a release clause, wasn't it? Yeah.
A release clause. The only thing the clause said was if an amount shows up, or if a club makes an offer greater than this amount, Liverpool would be obligated to discuss a transfer. That's all the clause said, which in the football world means absolutely nothing. So all we knew is we wanted to trigger a conversation. Now, we could have said 41 million, we could have said 45 million, we could have said 105 million. But the only thing we were trying to do was trigger a conversation. And yes, in terms of public perception and retrospect and everything else, yeah, certainly, if we had offered 45 million, I doubt the response from Liverpool would have been what it was. It is now part of football folklore. But it was never meant to be a transfer clause, a transfer fee. It was meant to trigger a conversation between the clubs.
Yeah. Again, that's a bit of a sliding doors moment. I mean, that summer, I presume, had Suarez arrived, had that actually gone through, Mesut probably wouldn't. Do you think, or would that still?
Yeah, I doubt. He would have been the signing for the summer, especially in terms of the cost.
Yeah,
but remember, we had already settled on the player's salary. Mm-hmm. So that part of the equation was off the table. Suarez said he wanted to come. We had already negotiated what his salary was going to be. So the remaining piece was Liverpool.
Yeah. Do you think that the 40 million £1 sort of immediately put an end to that possibly happening because of how it was viewed? You know, maybe if you'd have gone 45 or something like that, then the negotiation might have started off on better terms, if you see what I mean? Or do you think sort of looking back on it now, that was kind of the end of it right there? No,
I think what it did is it brought it out into the open, because I think up until then the Liverpool, Suarez, Arsenal conversation had been pretty discreet. That offer blew it open because suddenly Liverpool were not forced to speak to us, but the agent could say, well, you now have an offer that's over 40 million. And I'm only recounting what I've heard, but I think that the real crunch, okay, and then this will probably add a little bit of spice, and this is hearsay. So Arsenal fans, please don't take this as fact. But what I was told was that Steven Gerrard, came to Suarez, pulled him aside, put his arm around him, and he says, "Listen, Arsenal aren't a big enough club for you. How can you go to a lower club than Liverpool?" And I think if there was any reason, this part I believe, if there was any reason that Suarez stayed another year, it was down to Gerrard.
Steven Gerrard. Yeah. It's an interesting one. That it's like you said, like I said, it's definitely gone down in folklore. I'm pretty sure in 50 years we're still probably going to be talking about that that transfer offer. But I mean, I suppose it's sort of publicly, I don't know if it's right to say it kind of maybe damaged Arsenal a little bit in their reputation and how they went, but they were certainly opening themselves up for criticism, and open you up really for criticism as well. I mean, Ian Wright has famously, sort of, criticised you quite a bit in the press while you were still at the club, and he pointed to that offer and kind of put it on your shoulders more than anyone else. There's sort of the whole Joel Campbell story as well. And being that sort of, although you were behind the scenes a lot, and no one really sort of ever heard you talk or saw you much during that time, there was a lot of criticism pointed at you and how the club was operated. And how was that to sort of handle? You know, I suppose you've got to have very broad shoulders to be able to sort of deal with that sort of thing. Was it a tough time? How did you handle it when criticism came your way over potential dealings or negotiations?
Well, certainly, you know, you're not human if you you know, if you don't feel the criticism, and certainly I felt it. But when I took the job, I remember sitting down with Arsene and Ivan and saying, number one, I don't want to be out front. Okay, so I don't want to be in the press. I don't want to be a protagonist in any transfer story. And I think that suited all of us. Because, Charles, part of that decision was related to my experience in Brazil. And in Brazil, I was very high profile. I was high enough profile that I remember that the security from Corinthians came to me one time and said, we don't want you to go to the matches anymore. And I'm saying, why on earth can't I go to the Corinthians matches? He says, it's a security issue. And I said, so what's the issue? He says, well, we're getting rumors among the fan groups that you're the reason that the club has problems. And we just don't want you, we just don't want exposure. So, you know, that covered, I realized that being part of something as sensitive as the signing and, you know, player contracts and being part of those operations exposes that individual. But I just didn't have any desire to be a protagonist. So that really colored a lot of my approach. For example, I don't believe I ever gave an interview during you know, the years I was with the club. I certainly, to my knowledge, never spoke to the press. But yes, anytime you had negotiations that failed, and you heard you know, somebody you know, on Talk Sport giving their expert opinion, sure, of course it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. I mean, you left in 2018, but you made the decision earlier than that. I think you told Arsene in the summer of 2017,
Correct.
didn't you?
Yeah.
Why did you come to the sort of decision that your time had sort of come to an end at Arsenal at that point, and how difficult was it to make that decision and to tell Arsene that you were, you know, probably calling time on it?
Well, I described to my friends that the drive from my home in St. Albans to Arsene's house in Tottridge was probably the most difficult drive of my career. Arguably, we had a magnificent working relationship. Arsene is exactly the kind of person you want to work for. He has your back. He's very clear. So there was nothing on the work front that I was unhappy about. On a personal front, I had done the job for, you know, in that specific job, I had done the job for coming on 9 years. I certainly wasn't burned out, but I realized that that it probably had different priorities creeping into my life, and you know, and it was time. I don't know how to describe it, Charles, other than saying you just you know, when you've had a very full and productive and satisfying career, the hardest part, so I understand football players completely, the hardest part is calling time on it, because there's always that sense, well, let me just stay one more season, right? But, you know, one more season wasn't going to make a difference to us financially. It wasn't going to make a difference to my emotions. So it was a sense that that it was time to call, my career.
Mm. I remember you said to me that working with Arsene was like the biggest privilege you had in your career. I mean, why was that? Can you just explain that? Why was he such a special person? Why was he such a privilege? And what was it like working so closely with someone like Arsene?
Well, first of all, he's highly intelligent. So you're dealing with somebody who is thoughtful and who's smart. Okay. The second thing is Arsene has a magnificent sense of humor. Dry is the way we describe it in English, but he has a wonderful sense of humor. The single biggest part is imagine working for somebody who has integrity. And for me, integrity means that they take a position that may not always benefit them. In other words, if they stick to the decision they have made, it may cost them personally. And I saw that time and time again with Arsene. He made decisions, he stuck by them, even when it came at some personal cost. So, I had a wonderful career. I met people from all over the globe, but very few of them had those types of qualities that made it special to work for him. Great sense of humor, super intelligent, but most of all, tremendous integrity.
So you made the decision, or you made it public to Arsenal in 2017. You stuck around to the end of the transfer window in 2018, and so your final dealings really was the Aubameyang deal, wasn't it? Which was a pretty remarkable deal. In fact, how that all played out. You had the Ozil contract renewal as well at the same time as well. So it wasn't like you sort of went away quietly into the background. You sort of went off with a bang, really, with two massive deals for the football club. And the Aubameyang was so crazy with different people involved, wasn't there? Different players involved.
January 2018 was absolutely probably the most tense movement of players that we had, because where do you start? So we had a triangular situation going on in which Chelsea was interested in Olivier Giroud. Okay.
Yeah.
If I can't remember the name of the player that was moving on loan from Chelsea to, I think, Dortmund.
It's Batshuayi, wasn't it?
Batshuayi, yes, that's right. And then Aubameyang was going to come to Arsenal. In the midst of all that, we had Sanchez swapping with Mkhitaryan, remember?
Yeah. And
then we had Theo going to Everton. So for a January window, which are normally pretty quiet windows, we had massive movements in the first team. And I remember that three-way deal was dependent. Dortmund made it very, very clear that they were only going to release Aubameyang if they could get Batshuayi. That was the deal. But of course, we had no certainty that was going to happen. So I finally decided that the only way to kind of break this deadlock was to speak to someone that over the years I had developed a certain level of trust with. Trust isn't a word that I use in football very much, but every time I had spoken to her and we had reached an agreement on things, she had followed through. So the only way I know how to kind of break that deadlock of, is this really going to happen, was to call Marina Granovskaya at Chelsea. And I said, Marina, my understanding is this. You guys want Olivier? Yes. Dortmund, we want Aubameyang, but Dortmund's only going to release Aubameyang if Batshuayi goes. And so, Marina, is Batshuayi going to go to Dortmund? And she said yes. And when she said yes, I had reasonable certainty that we could get this three-way deal done. Mm-hmm. In answer to your question, yes, it was a very challenging window.
I mean, it's been 7 years now since you've gone. Do you still watch Arsenal a lot? Do you sort of view yourself as a fan
Every
now?
match.
You do.
Yeah. Well,
So the
I
story
still
didn't
have,
end. The story didn't end when you left Arsenal. The story.
no, and I still have, 7 years in a player's career is effectively a career. So I still have very fond memories of some of the young players I signed that have come through. Of course, the generation that's on the pitch now. I mean, I remember walking down the tunnel. Charles, you remember the tunnel where there were images of all the players up and down the tunnel.
Yeah.
And I remember walking that with my wife back in 2011, 12, 13. And she turning to me and says, you've signed every single one of those players. And I thought about it and I said, you're absolutely right. But in the 7 years since I left, of course, there's only one player at Arsenal that's still there. And his name is Mikel Arteta. So I negotiated Mikel's deal when he came, and 2 successive player contracts. So I do have that sense of it's wonderful to see Mikel there, because I always felt that was home for him.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, how do you think he's doing? I mean, obviously he's a man. He signed him in that crazy end of 2011 transfer window, the 48 hours that it felt like about 20 signings came in after the 8-2 defeat at Manchester United. He was obviously the main one. It went right to the wire again and almost didn't happen. Looked like it had completely collapsed on the day, and then he kind of forced it through himself, really, as well. And he played such a massive part in that deal even happening. He was so determined that he was going to join Arsenal, and I think you see that sort of determination that maybe he showed to get that transfer done. You kind of see that in him as a manager as well, and don't you? You sort of, how do you view it?
Yeah. Yes. If Mikel Arteta hadn't taken control of that transfer on that day, he would never have become an Arsenal player. Yeah, he might have become an Arsenal player later, but he was instrumental to making that deal happen on that day. And yes, the kind of determination, commitment, follow through, were qualities that we subsequently saw on the pitch. He was that kind of player as well, but he's also that kind of person. So today's Arsenal is a joy to watch. The quality of the football, the quality of the technical quality of the players, the way Arsenal plays as a fan is just a joy to watch. If I see another team set up a low block, I'll probably pull my hair out. But they know that that's the way they have to play Arsenal, because if they open up at all, it's going to be a shower of goals. What do I think of the team today? I think Mikel has done the hardest job that there ever is in an organization, and that is to set the culture. Because you can win games, you can lose games, you can win championships, you can lose championships, but once you've lost the culture, getting it back is just a long process. And some organizations never do. But I think Mikel came into the club and he saw a culture that he liked and respected. I think the culture of the club resonates with him personally. And when he had the chance to be the manager, I think he made a very determined and successful effort to preserve, what we call the Arsenal. Mm-hmm. And he deserves massive amounts of credit for that. Winning and losing games and things like that happens. But winning a culture is very, very hard.
Lovely, Richard. I think that's a perfect time to call time on this. Thank you very much
right.
for joining me and being the first guest on my Arsenal story. I hope everyone who's watched and listened has enjoyed it. There's plenty more guests lined up to continue this series as we head throughout the summer towards the start of the new season. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for them. Richard, again, thank you very much for joining me. Really do appreciate it.
Charles, thanks, and all the best to you. This sounds like a wonderful series that I know the fans don't want to miss.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, and good luck
Right.
with the book as well. I
Right.
look forward to seeing it. Speak to you soon. Bye bye, everyone.
Goodbye.